We're back in session, and we are going to, will the clerk please read item 4C, a discussion regarding operations of the Topeka Zoo.
C is discussion on the governance of operations at the Topeka Zoo.
City Manager?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Tonight, we're going to have Deputy City Manager Doug Gerber will kick us off and continuing the discussion related to our consideration of changing the governance model for the zoo and how we work with them. Making these changes has required a lot of effort and a lot of changes that needed to be worked through in order to find out that's feasible. So basically tonight is just an update on that, and we'll have Doug go ahead and start us off.
Governing body, good evening. I'm pleased to be able to talk to you about another TIF project. Wait.
Okay, you got our attention.
As the city manager said, we spoke about this issue several months ago, and at that time we said to you that we talked about in terms of a pie metaphor, and there was a question about what kind of pie is it, what the ingredients are in it, and so we wanted to bring you up to date in terms of what we've been doing the last couple months. So our plan this evening is Brendan is going to get up. We're going to tag team this approach. Brendan Wiley will get up and sort of talk about the background and why we're doing this as a reminder for everyone, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing and need to get governing body input on a couple of issues, and then Lisa Robertson will finish us off and talk about what the next steps will be in terms of potential governing body actions. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Wiley for his wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Doug. Deputy Mayor, members of the council, city manager, truly a pleasure to be here. I'd like to make a couple quick introductions if I might. In the audience is Fred Patton, Representative Fred Patton, who has darn near been involved with this process as long as I have, and also Shane Beavers. Shane is a member of the Friends of the Zoo board. He's the board treasurer. He's also on the Seaman Foundation board. He's one of those individuals that gives his time to organizations within this community and is one of the best board treasurers I've had the opportunity to work with. Wow. Truly top notch. Not that we want that word to get out, so please don't share. Shane is also guarding the snake. Had this wonderful pull a rabbit out of a hat analogy. In the end, it just wasn't going to work. So, snake is in the audience also.
We saw you walking around with it.
And it will stay there. Real quick, background, I will actually try to be fairly quick. Some background if you're new to this process or if you're watching from home. This is a conversation that really started in 2009 as a result of a special inspection with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. The following May, I started my employment with the city of Topeka and the Topeka Zoo and was tasked with evaluating this process. In 2012, after really working through a number of regulatory and compliance issues, Friends of the Zoo hired a consultant called Zoo Advisors to really help both the city and Friends of the Zoo really evaluate what a public-private partnership might look like to operate the zoo with. We just weren't quite ready in 2012 to do this. This is one of those things that really has to happen at the right time, and it's got to be a win-win for both the city and the nonprofit entity. But what did happen in 2013 is we did develop a public-private partnership with Friends of the Zoo and began a process of transferring parts of the operation from the city to FOTS. Things like the gift store, FOTS already operated, but we put all of the point of sale, everything that expenses increased with more people coming to the zoo, that's what we put under Friends of the Zoo. And things that increase with more people coming to the zoo, like custodial services. We transferred those to Friends of the Zoo as well. So it was back in 2013 where this process really started to take place. In 2015, Friends of the Zoo began hiring all of the seasonal summer help for the zoo. This included part-time staff, part-time being the key word here that actually is supervised by city staff. In 2016, really through last year, continued to contract with zoo advisors and continued to evaluate what this model might look like. Even in 2019, we had to ask Friends of the Zoo to do one more thing, and that was to hire a part-time education staff to be supervised by city staff. The kind of bottom line to this story is that we have already gone through a process where we have outsourced everything that we can to a third party to save the general fund from incurring more expense to operate the zoo. You notice that I've referenced part-time staff is what Friends of the Zoo can contribute, because when you're talking about full-time hourly staff, then you're getting into agreements that the city has with different bargaining units, and it just doesn't really work that way. So that brings us where we are today. And if there is an apology that I need to make to this body, to my boss, it's that there was probably a period of time where got a little comfortable and didn't drive this issue as hard as it probably should have. After the last time that we came here to discuss this topic, we got a lot of questions. Are you for this or against this? So I guess my nonpartisan stance came across, but it should not have. This is a process I'm very much in support of because it's really the mechanism that will allow the zoo to continue to grow without taxing the general fund. And when you can see a model where you can do that without putting extra tax burden on people, you have to ask the question, why aren't we doing that? So this is something that is a industry best practice. This presentation that was in your packet references 70% of accredited zoos already do this model. This packet was done by zoo advisors for us back in 2013. That current statistic is about 77%. When people ask me, what is this deal? The very simplest explanation I give them is, on day one, it's the same people doing the very same thing, but under a different budget model. Year 3 and year 5 down the road, it's the same people plus more people doing more things, providing more service under a different budget model, which has not cost the city any more money to accomplish it. So as simple as that explanation is, it's still kind of hard to understand. But some of the other benefits that this process provides is that the expense that the city incurs through a management fee to a third party to operate the zoo typically becomes more fixed. It typically does not escalate at the same rate as operational costs escalate. It creates a better process for fundraising. It clarifies operational directives. You know, today at the zoo, there are actually 2 different organizations that work there. On purpose, we all wear the same uniform because people that come to the zoo don't care whose problem it is. They just want the problem fixed. But unless you are really in the inner circle, you're not going to know who works for which organization. Yet at the same time, we have multiple systems for payroll for 2 senior executives. You know, there's still a lot of efficiency that could be gained by consolidating into one organization. But more than anything, it continues a transition that has already begun based on best practice, positioning this organization to have the best outcome for the community that it serves. So with that introduction, I think most of my role tonight is going to be one that listens and one that takes notes and one that gets ready to offer answers to questions that you may have. And I'm going to turn it back over to Doug to really guide the conversation.
Brendan, thank you.
Thank you.
No offense to either one of you, but we're not the council that's voting on this, so I'm curious why you're presenting this tonight so close to a new council.
I think, Councilman Jensen, that question is going to be answered when City Attorney Robertson presents her portion of it, in really what the role of the council is. Do you want?
Deputy Mayor and Councilman Jensen, I think it's like a lot of the conversations that we're having now that have been ongoing. We want to make sure those conversations continue. We want to make sure that our operations don't stop from November to January while a new body's coming into play. You know, this is the body that's familiar with this issue, and so we want to keep you in the conversation. We do need some input from you in terms of how we're going to model the development agreement. And so for all those reasons, we felt like it was appropriate to just keep this conversation continuing.
Fair enough. I didn't want you guys to have to do double work if you're just going to have to represent it again, and it's the exact same thing. But yeah, if you're looking for feedback, then absolutely. Thank you.
So in terms of feedback, I have a list here of things that I'd like to go through with you and get everybody input on. But I think one thing that both Brendan and I have failed to mention is that in the interim, one of the things we have done is we issued an RFQ, essentially, request for qualifications, and we distributed that appropriately far and wide, and in zoo publications and across the nation, actually. And we received one response back to that, and that was from Friends of the Zoo. So we were pleased by that they wanted to continue this conversation with us. So part of that has been modeled around the idea that this will be with Friends of the Zoo because they were the one and only respondent to the RFQ. Additionally, one of the things we've been doing in the interim has been having employment and compensation conversations. Now, not to get into too many details with that, but FOSS has developed a compensation model for existing zoo employees, a retirement model, and those things match up very closely with the city's existing model. Because one of the things going into this, we all wanted to make sure we did was treat the employees fairly and appropriately and make sure that their transition was an easy one to the potential of FOTS. We've been having conversations with the bargaining unit. In this case, it's the AFT. Brendan and our HR directors had 1 or 2 conversations, and we have some additional conversations scheduled. So that will take place here in the very near future. We've been developing asset lists, whether it's animals, technology, borrowed animals. There's been just all sorts of lists that we've had to develop that will become exhibits to the development agreement that the body will eventually be able to look at. And so now, one of the things we want to talk about is just, again, get some input from you on how some of the basic terms of that agreement. As Brendan said, ultimately, it's kind of a simple concept. On day one, it will look exactly the same. but behind that exactly the same look is a 30-page document that details all the what-ifs and whereases and all the potential scenarios. And so some of the things we would like body input on is what should the term of that agreement be, or that license be? I guess it's technically a license. What we have penciled in right now is 10 or 15 years. I don't think anybody's super opinionated about whether it's 10 or 15, but if the body has a different thought on that, certainly we would like some input on that. From a governance perspective, we have suggested that in the agreement that the new governing board for the zoo, the new thoughts board, have 2 governing body representatives on that board, so that one of the concerns we heard when we did some individual meetings with this group is that the city would sort of lose an ability to have influence over what was happening at the zoo. And since it was ultimately a community/city asset, it might be appropriate to have some representation, and so we've written that into the agreement. But again, that would certainly be something that we would want input on in terms of how that might look. We've also included 2 city staff members and are suggesting that that be the Director of Public Works and the Director of Finance and Administration. But again, that can be something, that is something that we need input from the body on. And then the final thing that I would say that we specifically need input on is the management fee. There are many roads to Gwin. There's a lot of ways to get where we need to go. Some of the models we've considered looking at include tying the management fee to the mill levy. Just for easy math right now, we can say that the zoo is about 2 mills of general fund dollars. So maybe an agreement moving forward keeps that 2 mill strategy, so that as the city grows, the zoo can also grow a little bit of revenue from the city. There's also the potential of just picking a number and keeping that steady throughout the term of the agreement. Again, similar to the mill model, the zoo portion of the general fund right now is about 2%. So perhaps, through the course of the agreement, it stays at 2% of the general fund or some variation of that, some percentage of the general fund. And then finally, one of the things that we looked at and talked about was maybe there ought to be, it starts at whatever it is right now and then steadily declines to a number that gets close to 0 over the course of the agreement. So that's really the big one that we need body input on as to how you'd like to see that modeled in the agreement. I've kind of thrown a lot at you. I guess at this point I'd stand for questions.
Do we want to
comments.
finish the presentation first? And then, or do we want to address all this first?
I'm fine to go. if
Okay,
guys
why
would
don't you
prefer that.
go ahead and finish?
Okay.
And as was referenced, there's going to be several actions that the governing body is going to need to take. One of those is going to involve going into the Topeka Municipal Code and amending the section that deals with the department that talks about the zoo. As you know, there's a whole chapter that outlines each and every department that exists within the city, and there's going to have to be amendments made to the particular section that deals with the zoo. In addition, there's a chapter actually in Title 11 that has some of the references to the zoo as far as management and operation, but also deals a little bit with admission and management fees, so concession fees. So we'd have to go in and adjust those depending on what the body decides. And there'd also be a requirement for the governing body to amend the current and existing collective bargaining agreement that exists with AFT. As you'll know from what they mentioned before, we have the employees who work at the zoo who are under AFT. And if any amendments are made, the governing body would have to approve those. If no amendments are made, then that action wouldn't be necessary. But as was stated, we're in conversations with them, and we continue to converse with them to see, where those conversations lie. And then, as Doug and Brendan have mentioned a lot, there's going to be what's called a license agreement. There's deed restrictions associated with the zoo due to Louisa Gage, and that restricts the city from entering into a lease agreement. So we're going with a license agreement, which is allowed. That just basically gives permission for the zoo to operate, or for us to allow FOTS to operate, doing certain things that will be specifically specified in that license agreement. And as Doug mentioned, it'll be fairly lengthy. We've taken a couple of samples that we received from zoo advisors who have done a lot of work with this type of model, and they provided us with those, and we've looked through those and kind of picked through, deciding what the best sections and provisions were, and tried to put those together into what we think would work for our purposes. So the city manager will be able to execute the license agreement once we get all of these details that Doug mentioned kind of lined up. So we're not there yet, we're not close to being there yet, but that's kind of the direction we're going. So you'll need to do some things, and the city manager, after you've decided all that, will need to execute the agreement.
Okay, but what I hear Deputy City Manager ask, the term of agreement, whether to put council and staff on the board, or staff's already on the board. It's just whether to put the council on the board.
Deputy Mayor, yeah, a term of agreement is one of the things we'd like input on.
Right,
Governing body / staff representation on the board,
okay,
and then
And management fee.
a funding model, yes.
okay. Councilmember Hiller.
If I may, before we continue, when I had my one-on-one, we talked quite a bit about the assets and the capital budget, and I didn't hear you mention them this evening.
Councilwoman Harrow, thank
Make a
you.
big difference on all these other
It
things.
does, thank you for that. So the way we have it structured right now, from a capital budget perspective, as the body knows, when the countywide half-cent sales tax was passed a couple of years ago, that included a quality of life provision. Now, that provision didn't specifically, in the ballot language, didn't specifically say zoo, but I think everyone took it to mean that, or maybe it did.
It did
It
say,
did say zoo, yeah, okay, yeah. But
that's how they got it paid.
what I mean is, it didn't specifically detail dollar amounts to go to the zoo. Now, in our capital plan, we have some of those dollar amounts outlined in documents that this body has adopted, and so we would certainly continue that. Additionally, as you know, in last year's CIP, the governing body put forth an amount of $2.3 million for facilities across the city to have projects that had projects associated with them and needed funding, and the zoo was included in that. Again, there wasn't a specific amount of that 2.3 million. There were some estimates, but there wasn't a specific amount. And so we would intend to continue using funds from that 2.3 million as long as it was appropriated for maintenance projects at the zoo. Did I miss anything, Brendan?
Well, part of that discussion was the assets and who would own them, in effect own them anyway, and who then would be responsible for their care and maintenance. And if there was a percentage, then how would that work?
Let me ask a question. Are we into the discussion of this whole program, or are we just at the beginning and you need this info right here? So we can ask any question, we're onto the
Sure.
whole program. Okay.
Well, I wanted to ask the capital questions because that affects the whole structure of it.
Absolutely.
Who owns the buildings and so on.
Sure.
And Councilmember
And the
Heller,
animals.
that was a subject that was very heavily touched upon in most of the agreements that we were provided from other localities. And I'll tell you that from our perspective, we would retain ownership of the animals, but we would enter into an agreement with FOX to allow them to, obviously display the animals. There's a whole nother category that I wasn't aware of that Brendan kind of clued me in on, which is loaned animals. We have all kinds of agreements with other entities that have provided us with animals that we can display at the zoo. And so we'll have to honor those agreements. Brendan has been diligently putting together asset lists So every vehicle that we have, every exhibit that we have, he's been putting together a list of all of those. So those would transition over to FOTS. But if at the end of the agreement, FOTS no longer was going to renew up and we wanted to take those back, we would have the opportunity to do that through a bill of sale. So those kinds of things would be addressed. It's not concrete yet because it's just kind of in the exploratory, I guess, phase, but that's part of the, I guess, the language that we've been looking at.
Additionally, I guess the language that we've been looking at talks about, given the city's underlying ownership of the premises, that we would work with FOTS, and there's some language in there that's essentially to the best of our ability to help secure funding for capital projects. But I think it's our intention as we look at that to model it in a fashion similar to like the Kay's Garden or those kinds of projects where FOTS does fundraising, and then if necessary, the city potentially helps them with debt issuance to get the project moving, and then we enter into an agreement where FOTS makes debt service payments or something similar.
Any other? Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you. Has anybody reached out to the Gage family to see if they're supportive of this? That's clever.
Wait till 10 o'clock.
Oh, my. And I don't know that we have to, but it just seems to me like, you know, they're the ones that helped start a lot of this. It seems like it'd be worth it just to bounce it off of them, and that might make some of the agreements easier if they're not going to fight it.
If,
Councilmember Jensen, we have definitely looked at all of the deed restrictions and are well aware of what we can and cannot do within the parameters of those. I have not talked with anybody who's an heir of the Gage family or anything, but I'm definitely well aware of what we can and cannot do within the parameters of that language. I don't know if
if anyone is aware of contact information, I would be interested in that. To this, we are having trouble identifying that.
Okay.
Gage's had a daughter. I mean, you would think this far down the road, there would be a whole bunch of heirs. They had a daughter who I believe died at the age of 13, hence exactly why they deeded their property. But we've just started looking at previous lawsuits to see if we can actually find a name.
Okay. And again, it's not a requirement that we do that, but you know, if you talk about, hey, build public support to folks that donated, if they feel like this would be something that their ancestors would support, then it can't hurt us.
Okay, Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess my preference, Deputy City Manager, would be, is it possible that you could send us an email? My preference would be getting an email from you outlining the pros and cons as you see it of each of these options. I definitely have, some first thoughts on things, but I kind of hate to just shoot from the hip up here tonight and you get 10 different ideas from us all without, because there's going to be pros and cons to each of these things. And I guess I'd like to see your analysis of each of these.
Good idea. Councilmember Dobler?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A thought and a question, I guess, and the thought is on term. If we're doing something new, I kind of hate to see a 10 or 15-year term on that. Seems like we ought to do 3 or something like that and see how it works. Second thought is, the city's spun off entities in the past, Topeka Transit, the airports, the library. Yeah. Any thought about looking at something similar to Topeka Transit where the board is made up of appointees from the folks that are appointed by the city council, the mayor, perhaps an entity that has its own mill levy that and I see some smiles over there, but I don't know, this seems pretty complicated. And I think I'm going to have questions on liability. If you own the building, you know, who has liability for the person that trips and falls? How much insurance does FOTS have to carry? It just seems like a pretty complicated scenario, and I just wonder if we've addressed looking at it like we did some of the other spin-offs. Thank you.
Councilmember Ortiz?
I just want to make sure that we're all wanting to move in the same direction of doing that private partnership. That's what I want to make sure. And I think to Councilman Jensen, the Gage family, that's why they did that deed. We can't give it away. And they did that because they didn't want us to ever give it away. That's why they're going with the leasing. They're going around it, but I remember we've had this conversation. Neil, I think you were sitting in Brett's seat when we had this conversation across the table. And we've had this conversation before, and it was deep. It was deep, because a lot of our citizens didn't want us, constituents didn't want us to give it, to privatize it. So, that's some of my concern. I too would like to get an email, because I heard you say, do we need to give them 2 meals, you know, go down, you know, kind of taper off as we go? I mean, if we're doing a private partnership, I guess that's what I would be looking at, not to continue to give them money, you know, but to taper it off. I will say, when we did hire Brendan, that's one of the things that we looked at and we talked about was that we heard that Kansas City Zoo had went into private partner, you know. So I know that's been discussed before. And I also am concerned with the liability as well. Because if we own the animals, but they feed the animals or whatever, and they take care of them, and one of the animals dies, how does that affect us? I mean, you know, so just a lot of unanswered questions.
Deputy City Manager Gerber.
Deputy Mayor and Councilwoman Ortiz, thank you for raising the issue that I neglected to raise, and that is part of this tonight is a temperature taking too. We've been doing a lot of work, and this has been part of conversations for the better part of the last year, but part of this also too is, does the governing body still want to move forward with this? You heard Brendan express his support, certainly from a staff perspective. We're very supportive of this and continuing to move forward, but ultimately, of course, it's a body decision, so we at least need some affirmation as well that the body wants to continue to move forward with these conversations.
My question, if I may, my question would be, why is staff supporting this? Why are we doing this? Are we doing this to save money? I mean, why are we supporting this?
Well, I'll give you my comments related to that. I think, first of all, it looks at the possibility of us limiting our cost to run this particular program. We have a willing partner that's willing to step up and take more of the responsibility financially with regards to this particular facility. And they seem to have people that very much are willing to make that happen in their fundraising. So we have the opportunity that in these tight budget times that we have to limit our exposure related to the cost to continue to run a zoo and continue to have a good quality product that's put out there. Second of all, it actually will give them the opportunity to grow and do things that they want to do now that because they're included with our budget, they're limited at being able to do. They can't, we don't have additional general fund dollars to be able to support that. And when we're tied directly between a city and a public entity like them, there are people that will not give money as in great amount, knowing that it's connected to the city. And we know that, for example, with related to donations that related to Kay's Garden and other examples that have existed that Brendan could probably characterize. And so I think those are the primary things that I look at as being big drivers related to this.
Can Brendan answer you too?
No, can I respond? I was born and raised here, and I've sat in this seat a long time, and a lot of people won't give because fonts, they were not doing with the money there was a report that was out, and they were not doing with what people thought that they would be doing with their money. Now, having said that, that's turned around a little bit. It's turned around a lot, and they've stepped up to the plate. And the joke was, Fox is really not friends of the Topeka Zoo, you know, when that report came out. And I think, you know, you need to look at that. And I'm glad that we've turned all of that around. I'm glad that we've turned that around. But another thing I'm hearing is, so I think if they want to put money into it or whatever, I think they're able to do that even with us owning it. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then also with Kay's Garden, isn't that paid with all of Kay's money, her
No, there's a
inheritance?
portion of city money.
There's, okay,
Well, I mean, we backstopped it related to that.
okay. But a lot of that is her money, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, we can't really kind of
But
compare.
the point that I was making with regards to that is there had to be a special arrangement made in order to make that happen.
For Kay's,
Yes.
right. But wasn't that part of her?
It was her issue.
It was her, it was part of
Her
her
request.
recommendation. Yes, right. It was hers, because I worked for her and I remember that. So, again, our hands were kind of tied there, right? Because that was her request.
Right, but what I was trying to get at is that would not have entered into the picture had it been run by FOTS at the time that someone such as that had that kind of a position came forward with the interest of making a donation.
I don't agree with that. I thought that was her request that it
It
be
was,
set up
but-
like that, Brett.
She had no interest in providing that money directly to the city.
Right,
Her check would not run to the city.
right.
What I'm saying is if it's operated by FOTS, then she would have been able to give that money and wholly to FOTS because FOTS would have been the one operating it rather than us.
Thank you, Mayor.
Brendan, would you like to say why you support?
Sure. You know, one of the things well, as a staff at the zoo, you know, we're always strategizing, how do we tell that positive story? What's the good feel? So it occurred to us that the part of this conversation that we really haven't talked about is what if we don't do this? And it's an interesting group that's in this room tonight with Councilmember Dobler, Councilmembers Hiller, Ortiz, and even Joe Ledbetter, who have witnessed cycles that the zoo has gone through. And I'm not much of a historian, but I made a point to learn the history of the organization that I work for. And if you go and look at the zoo's past, about every 10 years or so, there's a cycle that it goes into, and the cycle relates to available dollars to spend. And the last two 10-year cycles ended up resulting in a, oh gosh, what do you call it with the federal government? No, well, let's just say a lawsuit with the federal government, in this case, the USDA. Both times that triggered some sort of blue ribbon panel. I can map that out for you. So we're in another one of those cycles, and it's something that I've known about for a while. It's just you've got a different commitment from the group that is running the zoo and the city leadership team that's responsible for its operations. So something will change. But if we can't connect the dots on how to grow, then we'll have to evaluate the programs to eliminate, to operate within our means, because we can look at our past and see what happens when you stretch, and then it breaks. We can't break again. And so please know that you have that commitment. We will not let this zoo break again. But it's not going to stay the same.
Okay, we do have Representative Patton to speak on this issue here. Like to come up and hear from you?
Sure, and I'm going to throw away everything I prepared to try to answer your questions. I was actually worried, why did I show up on the night you have Whitney Dameron here talking about legislative issues? But if you ask me any of those questions, I wrote down a comment he said. It was, roadblock has been the Senate. That is going to be my answer from now on. Roadblock has been the Senate. Okay, where to begin? I guess to start with, and I heard this from a couple of you when Brendan came a few months ago to talk about it. You were concerned about the city giving up its zoo. And both, a couple of you have mentioned this tonight, that on day one, nothing's going to change. Well, I would argue in 10 years from now, the key pieces are not going to change. It's still going to be a partnership between the city and FOTS like it is today. You're still going to have, maybe not the exact same employees, but the same types of employees with the same passion for our zoo. The zoo's going to continue to make a difference in the community, and it's still going to be the Topeka Zoo. And I wrote that down earlier, but now that Councilman Dobler raised a point, maybe it won't still be the Topeka Zoo, because there are other options we can look at, and maybe it will become the Shawnee County and Topeka and Shawnee County Zoo. Maybe it'll become something else. But I think this is the first step towards figuring out what that something else is. I think we have to do something. If not, we're never going to explore those other options. We have had some of those conversations. We've talked about how does the library do it, how does the Metro do it. One, a lot of that takes legislative approval, and I don't think we're going to get legislative approval to add a new taxing entity anytime soon. And so maybe this is a good step to showing the legislature and the community that we can do a public-private partnership, that it is working, and we should look at different funding streams. Because I argue, as someone who lives in the county and doesn't pay a dime to support the zoo, I go there quite often. Maybe I should. And so maybe as we move forward, we should look at a broader funding base. Councilman Ortiz, you talked about the difficulty FOTS has raising money, and I would argue that the donors that I've spoken to have forgotten those bad days at the zoo. We have not only turned the corner, it's been so long ago that other than some of the people in the room, we've thankfully forgotten about what condition the zoo was in at one point in time. Through public and private donors, we've raised almost $22 million in the last 5 years. So we're bringing in a lot of money to do infrastructure. The concern with that, though, is if we don't do something new, we can't support that infrastructure. The city, when Brendan came in, there are fewer people working at the zoo now being paid for by the city of Topeka than there were when Brendan came here. But you look at all the things we're doing now that we were not doing then. We have way more exhibits. Camp Cowabunga's opened, no new city staff to support that. We put on a lot more events. We have an expanded education program. You guys know, you all take advantage of these things, and we're doing that all with less city resources than we were doing before. And we've tried to be creative. We've moved things to FOTS, as many as we can, and Brendan has done a great job of everybody being one uniform, one team. But that's becoming more and more of a challenge as you shift to more and more staff being under not the city of Topeka. When I got involved with the zoo, I think we had 1.5 FOTS employees, and today in the summer we could have 40-some people out there. The majority of the staff do not work for the city of Topeka. Let's see what else. Raising money. Back to raising money. One issue we have is that more businesses in the community, more grants that you can apply for, want to be things like education focused. You know, how are you gonna make a difference in this particular area? And as the city manager said, people don't want to give money to the city of Topeka, but would they give money to a nonprofit? We believe so. Big issue. Of course it's a big issue. There's lots of decisions you all have to make, but thankfully we're not the first to do this. This has been happening across the country. We're now in the minority that have not done it, and not one that has switched to a public-private partnership has gone back to going back under city control. So I think we can look at all that and figure out how to put together a good package. And I don't even have a timer. Look at that. Let's see, what else? Again, lots of good things have happened in the last 10 years. But it's been a true partnership, and I think we've proven that we're all, no matter if you're city, FOTS, the community, we're going to do whatever we can to support the zoo. And I think our position has just been moving forward. If we're going to keep growing the zoo and not let it fall back behind, we're either going to have to do a public-private partnership, or somehow we're going to have to come up with additional resources. And I think in the budget that you guys have now and the budget you're going to want to have moving forward, you're not going to want to allocate more staff and resources to the zoo. And I think this allows us to do that. I think I'm done rambling. Any questions, anything I missed?
Councilmember Leslie.
The only thing that I would like to clarify, I do feel the need to do that. The only thing I would like to clarify as the treasurer for the Fred Patton House of Representatives campaign, he did not just propose a county tax.
I did not. I know, but I think at some point we should. I'm glad the TV's
He
doing
did, on
He was
purpose.
just brainstorming the things that was, so I just want to clarify that.
If anybody could carry it.
Councilmember Jensen.
I don't know how you follow that, but, so here's my concern, and albeit it is somewhat selfish. We've just been through trying to sort out the TMTA and got a lot of public feedback about how dissatisfied people are with the bus service, for better or for worse. And it was really frustrating for me because people would call me and express their frustration, and I don't have any authority or any ability to do anything about it because we don't have any control over that organization. And albeit that was done intentionally to some degree, but what are we going to do when that same situation, for better or for worse, and you guys have a great team now, but
Right.
My job is to shoot holes in whatever I can come up with in the future because things will change. So what are we going to do in that situation when a future council is stuck with a bunch of people who are upset at some issue with the zoo?
Right.
And we don't have any ability to affect change there, again, for better or for worse.
I think you have to give yourself that ability and put it in the agreement that these are the things that will happen. If FOTS is not doing it, then this is the reaction, the consequence of not doing it. And I believe that's being addressed. Because I agree, you don't want to have that situation, or you don't want to be downstairs here and not getting enough money, and so they come back and lobby more money. I think it all needs to be well thought out, because you've experienced situations like this, and they've not all been on the best, so we have to make sure to
And you
try
guys
to
are
protect
totally okay
everybody.
with that?
Absolutely. And as I've told those of you I've met with, I'm not advocating to do this unless it's best for the city of Topeka, it's best for FOTS, and most importantly, best for the zoo. Why else would we do it? What we've been doing has worked. We've patched it together. But if we want to keep doing better, I think we need to try something new. And otherwise, why? I mean, we have a good zoo. I think it can continue at that level for a while. But I'm not going to benefit. FOTS isn't going to benefit. I mean,
Can you
this
promise me
has
more
to-
koala bears?
We had koalas when I was a kid. And, yeah, I don't know.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Deputy City Manager?
And I think to pick up on what Fred said, to give yourselves the ability to do that, not only with what's in the agreement, but also with the seat at the table. And that's why we suggested that governing body members elect several of their own to sit on the FOTS board, so that in a fashion maybe similar to JADO, where the governing body has several of their members representing the whole on that board, they could do the same on the zoo board and help guide the zoo experience.
And that kind of comes to my question, help guide. I would not want them on there dictating. It would be to help guide and be a part of. And then I also had a question about the management fee. You had said something about the mill levy, and then if it stays that, then that was what it would stay for the zoo, right? As an option. But then you said something about steadily declining. So I'm not sure, are we supposed to be declining the funds? Are we supposed to think of a way to keep it steady? Yes,
Deputy Mayor, I think that is,
the question?
this will sound a little bit like a cop-out, but that's a governing body policy decision. I gave you 4 potential examples, and I will email those to you as requested and give you some analysis. There's literally hundreds of ways you could structure this. Those are just some of the more prominent ways that I think the governing body could do it. But again, it comes down to at what level of support are you comfortable to help make sure that this is a success for FOTS and for the city of Topeka?
Well, then who would know the answer to that? What do you need? Do you need ongoing? Do you want it to steadily decrease and be zero?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would argue, at least initially, it would be nice to keep level funding. Moving forward, hopefully we can bring in additional resources to fund operations. Funding operations is difficult through grant money and donations, but I think we could over time move in that direction. We want to make sure that the zoo still is fairly accessible. So one thing FOTS could do is, raise rates, but nobody wants to see that. We want the community still to be able to come. And so that's a balancing test too as we look forward, is I assume most of you want the zoo to be a place that people can come and not have to pay a lot of money to come to. And so that's why the city kicks in money. And so we need to keep that at least a somewhat flat level for a while, while we try to make sure this works right.
Okay. Councilmember Ortiz?
Thank you. Why I have you here and why I have Brendan here, I know somebody that's been wanting a bench, that wants to pay for a bench.
This is all on Brendan.
Oh, okay.
He's the bench.
Thank you. I have emailed him. Thank you. That's all I need to know. So I'm still. That's all I want to do is buy a bench in memory of my dad.
Yes.
And put that money out there, and I'm still waiting. So, see,
It was her too that wants to pay it? Here's Brendan's issue with benches. I'll give him the answer, and then he can do it. We have a lot of benches at the zoo, and so his his concern is we should try to find other things for people to name and donate, because we were getting to have benches everywhere.
Like rocking chairs,
And that, yes.
although we're going to make your bench happen.
Oh, no.
And we'll do it this week.
No.
So, actually, we did have that conversation,
Greg, you said
and I
it right.
just didn't follow
You
up.
wanted it, you said it.
Councilmember Miller?
I think it would help if you're going to send something out to us. I was in part of the first round of one-on-ones, and so I had a chance to think about it. And it was something, I've certainly watched our city business model. I've watched what happened with THA when it was fully inside the city, when it was halfway outside the city, what's happened when it's flourished all the way out. Maybe that's the people, maybe it's the structure. I've watched TMTA here and what's worked and what hasn't. I've watched TPAC, which is where the city has kept, they're right in this same building. And that hasn't worked, that model hasn't worked very well for them. And that's one of the reasons we talked about just cutting cord on the assets and the ownership. And so I hope we all, if you get us to turn in survey stuff, that it's not like a ballot and that's what we voted to do. I would appreciate some outlines of, if we're going to do that, especially by ourselves, if you could send us some models of what has worked and be able to show us the pros and cons and why it worked, because I don't know those things. And so to ask me my opinion, I can give you my opinion, but I don't know that's worth a whole lot without some context of knowledge of how those options work and how we would fit into it. And then again, it's easy to look through the examples that we have here and then try and look at which ones are working better for us. It's painful in a way, but if what you're saying, what I'm hearing is, long ago, you created FOTS to help get volunteers and to raise money. So theoretically, having FOTS, having that partnership before was good enough. Is what you're saying to us that today you just can't cut loose and develop programming and raise money with the structure that you have?
No, I would say you guys have not had the ability to staff the zoo. And because of your budget restraints, FOTS has had to do so. We are no longer, yes, we help raise funds. He's now our chief fundraising officer who works for you. And so we spend not nearly enough time as an organization raising money, because we are now doing janitorial, we're doing gift shops, we're doing admissions, we're putting on events. We're doing everything city staff used to do. And so we have switched to where now FOTS is, other than zookeepers and Brendan, FOTS is doing a lot of the work at the zoo, and you're going to have to decide, we can't keep it at that point much longer, or the zoo's not going to keep operating at the level we want it to. And so out of necessity, we have gone from a fundraising organization to running a good chunk of the zoo operation.
But what you're proposing is to just do more of the running of the zoo operation.
Well, yeah, we're proposing to run the zoo. I think ideally it needs to be one or the other, and I don't think the city has the resources to do it all.
Well, I guess that's what drives me, is that these various proposals, some of them are kind of still half and half. It's just kind of reorganizing the half and half, and I don't want, if what we need to do is cut you loose, which I know is a conversation we had, so that nothing about the city strangles your ability to grow it, I don't want to go halfway
Right.
if what you need is all of it. You know, this idea about the assets, okay, fine, so what if they don't take care of the assets because they don't have any money, and then we get back crummy assets? Versus, you know, even if we put the rules out, we'll be nice and give them an extra couple of years and they'll keep running down. Correspondingly, one of the things Topeka has suffered with is the city hasn't felt like it had the assets, so we haven't fixed up their buildings. And so they keep waiting for us instead of running out and doing it themselves because of this combo of ownership and money control. And I don't think it's worked very well. And so I don't want to, unless there's a way to make that same model work better with you than it has with them, or just help us with that. I mean, if it all drills down to people, no matter what model, I feel like I need help with that. I don't want to tell you what I think would work when maybe it wouldn't.
We can help with that.
Okay.
And, you know, there's something, I just realized, okay, we haven't talked about this, but it's critically important. There's a federal regulatory agency that requires the city to make sure its zoo has an exhibitor's license. Whoever holds the exhibitor's license is who is going to be accredited. Because the city holds the exhibitor's license, it's bound to staff and feed and maintain. That's why Friends of the Zoo can't do that, because it doesn't have the federal obligation to follow the Animal Welfare Act. So moving the whole thing to Friends of the Zoo allows Friends of the Zoo to fund things like staff and
The license, Friends of the Zoo would hold the USDA license and be the AZA entity moving forward. I don't know that he made that clear. So it wouldn't be the city's responsibility anymore. That would also move to FOTS. And I think that should give you some assurance as well as keeping up buildings and keeping up exhibits. As those of you that have been around for a while and we're in the dark ages, when the zoo had issues, it was everything from big issues to paint chipping to, I mean, it was everything. So those inspectors are not they don't overlook things. And so they won't overlook things when and if Friends of the Zoo is the license holder as well. So,
Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess Mr. Gerber had asked to kind of take our temperature. I will tell you, when I was first heard about this, I was not in favor of it all, because again, it does feel like, you know, we're losing something that's a fantastic asset. At least my kids growing up, it was a great place to take our kids. But in meeting with them, I became convinced that this is, I think, a good idea. As Councilmember Dobler mentioned, obviously the devil's in the details, how we, things about liability, all sorts of things. But I'm sure those things can be worked out by an appropriate agreement. I do also agree the initial term for this thing needs to be as short as possible. But I'll just say, and I don't think I'm saying anything that probably everyone knows here, but a couple of years before I was ever here, I did a project with Brendan and Fawn at the zoo, and I was just amazed at what they get done with the little amount of money. I mean, I'm probably going to make friends that I know mad, but they're probably the most efficient department at the city. I mean, they get, it's amazing. I mean, but at the same time, it was sad in that what they wanted to do, I mean, what we did, there was just so much economizing going on. It wasn't near as nice as it should have been, but it was just, that was all the money they had to spend. But I'm a big fan of them. I've seen them stretch their budget, and something has to give. On another point, and then I'll shut up here. I was down at the New Orleans, my daughter, as you guys maybe know, got married a couple weekends ago down in New Orleans, or by New Orleans. Went to the zoo there on Thursday. Beautiful zoo, great facilities. It was $25 to get in. So, and they're not, there's no reciprocity, by the way. And we're seeing, Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, been up there in the last few months, it's $20-some to get in. Beautiful zoo. And so we're going to decide, is that what we want, or do we want to be a zoo where, I can bring my kids, 3 or 4 times a week, which, to me personally, I love the big zoos and all those things, but our zoo is so nice to, bring your kids and raise them. So I am supportive of this. If we can show that it saves money and, improves quality, I'm all for it, so.
Councilmember Dublin.
Thank you. I'll be really quick here. The difference between the zoo today and 13 or 14 years ago is night and day. If we can continue to improve and make it better, I'm all for it. I think that's the question you're asking tonight. Is there support? Certainly, I support moving forward with something and taking a look at the options and whatever we can find that makes the zoo continues to improve. Let's do it. Thank you.
Councilmember Lester.
I would just echo Neil's comments as well. I have, I don't know how to run a zoo, but I have utmost confidence in these two gentlemen, not only in their abilities, but also as where their hearts are at. So I too support moving forward and evaluating it, at a different level as well.
Councilmember Jensen.
I would agree. I almost wonder, though, if the city should get something more out of this deal. How about you all start a Friends of the Street department, and we get a 2-for-1 deal?
I will work on abandoned housing. How about that?
The zoo is one of our greatest assets, seriously, and if this is what it takes to go to the next level, then we absolutely need to seriously consider it.
I'll throw one last thing in. I do think, Councilman Emerson mentioned shopping. I personally, it's Christmas, and got some family in some different cities, been shopping admissions and friends costs, and ours are probably half of what many of the reciprocal zoos are. And I think it does make a difference in terms of the accessibility. I mean, Kansas City Zoo is like 16 and the Friends membership is 200. And for instance, and they're only 50% reciprocal.
We're talking about zoo attendance, something you should all be proud about, and maybe Brendan puts this in updates to you all. But in 2010, we had 111,000 some people attend the zoo, and as of the end of November, last weekend, we over doubled that. And so in 11 months, we've doubled what we had in 2010, which is a testament to what you have all put in and certainly what Brendan and his staff have done.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, I think that's great. It was a good point to bring up, and if that's something that we want to reflect in the agreement as well. I mean, obviously, there'd be some negotiation depending on what's going on, but that is of great value.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. That concludes wow, I've lost my spot. That concludes the non-action items. We will now proceed to public comment. We have Lloyd Schroeder. Lloyd Schroeder. We have Joe Ledbetter. Is Joe here? He even had me pray a few weeks ago.
That just hurts. Okay, so I wasn't going to go there, but since we were talking about the zoo, real quick, 2005, Neil was interim manager. I got appointed to that committee to review the zoo, and it's night and day from what it was 15 years ago. And a lot of those recommendations were taken. I wanted to do more. I didn't get consensus, but it was pretty harsh. But imagine that. But anyway, it's come a long ways in 15 years. I've got a lot of confidence in what they're doing out there. So that's all I want to say on that. Okay, so next week, if things remain unchanged, we're supposed to take a vote on a catastrophically huge rate increase on our citizens and our businesses and churches and hospitals and nursing homes and the poor, the rich, the middle class. And I'm just going, I can't believe we're doing this at Christmas time. And I can't believe we're doing it a year early. In fact, by the way, these are my comments only. I do have one client that asked me to speak on this, Mr. Fred Sanders. He's definitely opposed to it. Some of you know him, some of them don't. But one of the things is I was talking to different business people, and you would know a lot of these names, but I'm not going to give them. They said, I don't know anything about this. These are developers in Topeka. These are people with a lot of assets that pay a lot of taxes. He said, I don't know anything about this. And I had no idea that this was coming up. And so I said, well, you're not the only ones that were surprised, besides me and so many other people. And I did go back and watch the meeting from 2 years ago. And it seemed like there was a little more notice given to the public back then because there was some references to that. And remember when they passed that 2 years ago, they were down to like 1 week left of the current rate increase. And they said, oh my God, we're going to have to push this off 6 months. And finally somebody switched their vote on the promise that we would start rebuilding the pipes, which has not happened. But they did switch that vote and they did pass it. And but now we've got a whole year between now and when this 45 to 50%, depending on how you calculate it, increase would happen on our citizens. And so I actually laughed about this when I saw it. So I want to pass this out. There's one for the record. And this is a core request that I submitted the day after the last meeting when I spoke, and you guys graciously let me speak for 8 minutes. And one of the requests I made was I want to look at the study that underlies the PowerPoints, okay? Imagine my surprise, and I said, wow, I guess Black and Veatch didn't get the notice either that they were going to review this quick because their study isn't done. And I'm going, really? So at least I didn't feel so bad because even the people doing the study must have been left out on the notice because they probably thought you were going to discuss this sometime in the spring of 2020 since you had a year. But instead of reviewing a 2021 rate increase proposed, we're doing it in 2019, which makes no sense to the average person, especially these business people I was talking to, some of these business leaders. Next week, your agenda is incredibly long. It's way too long. Oh, I'm out of time.
You're out of time. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
I'd like to ask for 2 minutes because I gave some of that to the zoo.
Okay, we have a vote for 2 minutes.
Come on, Sam.
For yes, against no.
Why be any different, right?
We have 6 yes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And so the point I'm making here is I talked to some of the entities that are going to be. 2 minutes. Oh, it's times 2. I get 4.
Thank you for your
It says
comments.
2. There it is. Thank you. So I was listening intently to the conversations tonight, and it took about 15 months, if I heard the words right, to work on the camping ordinance. And I remember working on the TIF ordinance. I represented one of the developers, and I think we worked on that in committee about 8 months, and it's a very good ordinance. And it's because of the vetting. It's because there was public participation. There was private people actually coming in and telling you what they needed and what they thought. And then, tonight we're working on this district for downtown. And that's taken, I think, about a year. And that'll probably happen. But it's through that vetting process and letting the people actually be a part of it and understand it that you get really good ordinances. The same thing as what you're talking about with the zoo. You don't want to do that tonight. You don't want to do that in 1 week. You don't want to do that with just one PowerPoint without a study, by the way. You want to actually vet it. You want to actually talk about it and spend some time so that it's successful, so that it makes sense to the public. And so what we have tonight, if we bring this up next week and try to jam it through a year early, we have not done that. We have not done those good processes. So, and again, I think Black and Beach ought to really finish their work, and then you ought to have at least 30 to 60 days to review that wonderful study that we're paying $160,000 for. Now, they haven't billed the last $10,000 yet. So that again shows the work is not complete. And so if we're going to cite studies as the reason for doing something, they need to be completed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That just rules are rules to me. Okay, Carol Markle.
I always followed you.
She's better than me. She got all those signatures.
Oh.
For Parks and Rec.
I'm Carol Marple. I will never be a good speaker as Joe is. But this proposed rate increase really bothers me, and so I do have some comments about it. And yes, I do own property in the city, and the lady that lives there is on a very fixed income. There's just so many things about this increase that I don't understand. The biggest one is, what is the rush? Does this remind anybody of a $10 million park that the county wanted to rush to build? The city first proposed this increase on November the 19th, and now the idea is to vote on it probably December the 10th. And I'm sorry, you've got to hear some of the same things that Joe said. I can't deviate from my script. The current rates will be in effect for another year, so there's really not a rush. There's going to be 3 new city council members who will join the council January 2020. They're going to have to own this rate increase, but they're not going to have any say in it. That's not fair in my opinion, but then I don't think there's anything fair about this proposal. Every man, woman, and child needs water, but very few people are even aware of this proposed increase. And I can say that with 100% certainty because I have talked to so many people in the last 2 weeks and visited so many businesses that have no idea. They're going to largely be unaware of this increase until they get their first bill in 2021. And then you're all going to get phone calls and they're going to want to know what happened. I have spoken to most of the city council members through the years, and you've all struck me as very good and caring people, and you ran for this office because you wanted to represent the people in your area. You want to do the right thing for these people, and by passing this proposed increase is not the right thing until we have further study and input from the community. You know, I don't see that there's even been any discussion about the havoc that this increase will do to the people that live here. It's not going to be only their home water bill that will increase, but it's going to affect all of their lives. How many businesses are going to be put out of business because people no longer have the disposable income to afford the luxuries of going out to eat, going to the movies, washing their car? You know, what about the rescue mission? They can barely make ends meet now. They're not making ends meet. This is going to have a huge snowballing effect. We don't even have anything about what the money will be used for. I would like you to put on your JADO hat. What is this going to do to the economic development here? I don't think it's going to be any good. Has anybody asked Mars, Bimbo Bakery, Reese's, any of the businesses in town, what this water increase will do to them? And here's another question. Why are we spending our half-cent sales tax money to develop businesses in our county when most of the workforce comes from out of the county? Because you ask them why they come in here to work, because they can get good jobs. But why don't they live here? Because it's too expensive. You know, we have to make some changes. And unfortunately, there can't be a protest petition about this. But thank you very much. I hope you get to go home. Thanks.
Okay. We're now ready for announcements. Would the city clerk please read the preliminary agenda for next week's meeting?
So on the December 10th consent agenda, we have a resolution for initiation of eminent domain proceedings for the Wanamaker Sanitary Sewer Project. Action items include the real estate purchase agreement for 1910 Northwest Grove Avenue, ordinance for the 2020 Downtown Business Improvement District fee structure, the ordinance for the 2020 Topeka Tourism Business Improvement District fee structure, the ordinance for the AMR franchise agreement, a public hearing and ordinance on the Dynamic Core Redevelopment District. We have the ordinance on the utility rates, public hearing and ordinance on 2019 budget amendments. Discussions include the new fire station request to approve land acquisition, and then a discussion on the comprehensive housing study update.
Okay. City manager?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Two things tonight that I have are the announcement that we are having a public meeting to hear a presentation from Black & Veatch regarding the utilities rates, December 5th from 5:30 to 6:30 at the library. So anyone interested in coming and hearing what's being proposed related to the utility rates can hear the presentation. Also, there is a lunch and learn that is going to be held. GTP, Greater Topeka Partnership, is having a lunch and learn where city staff will be participating to explain to individuals that may have an interest in doing business with the city, explaining to them how they go through the process of getting registered as a vendor, where our announcements are put out regarding projects that we have available that they might want to bid on, or any type of services that we may offer. And so that's something that's being put on by city staff. Anyone interested? It's free. They can register on Greater Topeka Partnership's website.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Hiller.
Thank you. A quick comment about the rates. I know we'll get back to them, but just for what it's worth, I've been through 2 water rate increase rounds at this point. I remember last time really hammering the issues of what the industrial rates would be and what the resident, making sure there was a super low residential rate. One of the things, so the industrial folks were really engaged 2 or 3 years ago when we last did this. They knew that we would need to do it again. One of the things they said was, we need a year out so we can get in our budget. And so that resonated with me in terms of timing. We'll go from there, obviously, next week. I wanted to give a shout out to Megan Hayes. People saw probably the 2-page spread in the paper this week. She purchased 719 South Topeka Boulevard, which is a 19-unit property that used to be called the Kemper Flats, and is renovating it. It's right across from the Capitol, but a neighborhood that has often been, let's say, overlooked for a long time. It's just really exciting what she's done. It's all private market, and it's going to be great. The second thing I wanted to mention is that I ended up coming up for jury duty this week, and actually went through the process and served on a jury yesterday. We got done in a day, which I couldn't believe. But I just wanted to point out to people something I didn't expect was that they put the jury candidates through an orientation first, and there's a video that they show that the focus of which is why it's so important as a citizen in this country that we do juries, that it's trial by your peers. And it over and over talked about how important it was to have the broad diversity from the whole population in the room, that celebrated who we are and why we're here and what we fought for. And also that, again and again, that don't worry about exactly what all else you have. Bring your common sense, to the table, that common sense will lead you to a good decision. And it was just really reinforcing about all the things we believe in and that we do as a city. And if anybody ever wants a great video that just reinforces that or is an example for people, you could probably borrow it from Shawnee County Court System. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Ortiz? I wanted to say, I went to the Sheepdog Impact Assistance Turkey Trot at 7 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, and Eric from Channel 13 News did the little commentary, and they raised a lot of money for first responders. And one of the most exciting things I've got to do on the council, because the mayor's gone, is I get to pick the mayor's tree at the Festival of Trees. I'm just so excited about that. That's it for me.
Nothing?
Just real briefly, wanted to congratulate all the folks who worked so hard to put on the parade last Saturday. Everybody was blown away by the entire presentation. There's your dad joke for the week. So the comment I too will make on the water rate increase is, yes, we're asking for more money, but people are also asking us to fix things and fix them faster. That costs money. It's not free. And there's only so much optimization and privatization and that sort of thing we can do. The trick is the balance in how much people can afford versus how fast they want the system fixed. And it's important to have the conversation. Right now, all we've talked about is the money, the money, the money. But we also need to have the conversation about how much time people are willing to wait to have the water lines fixed, because those are directly corresponding. And it just needs to be a balanced conversation. Thank you.
Mayor Lester? That means no. Okay, do we need to extend time now? Yes.
I was just going to say,
Okay.
that's probably a good idea, given the
So we make, second? So Councilmember Ortiz made a motion,
To extend until we are done with our business.
and Councilmember Emerson seconded. All those in favor, vote yes, opposed, vote no.
All right. We have 8 yes.
8 voting yes, it has been approved to extend the time. There is one executive session this evening. If the city attorney would provide the motion.
The motion is to recess into executive session for a period of time not to exceed 30 minutes to discuss confidential employment matters pertaining to non-elected personnel as justified by KSA 75-4319B1 in order to protect the privacy of those discussed. To aid the discussion, the following individuals should be present: members of the governing body, Human Resources Director Jackie Russell, Human Resources Manager Sean Maysberger. No action will be taken when the open meeting resumes in the governing body chambers.
Okay. We already did that. Right.
Not for the
No,
executive
not for
session.
this. Okay. Brendan, and then get that, okay. All those in favor vote yes, opposed vote no.
Lose an answer too? SWAT team left.
Thank you. 7 yes.
Okay, we will adjourn to executive session. We have come out of executive session, and there is a need to continue. We will go back in for no more than 30 minutes.
So moved?
We have a second first. Second. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. We'll be back in 30 minutes. We have come out of executive session with the need to return for 20 minutes. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Raise your hand. All those opposed? We will be back in 20 minutes. We are finished with the executive session, and we are finished for this evening with no other business before the council. We are adjourned.
We'll take back any copies that you